All right, so welcome to the Kyle Experience. On this show, what we like to do is take seemingly complex ideas and transform them down into bite-sized pieces that everyone can easily digest. Today, we have Michael Paul with us. Is there anything you'd like to say to the crowd, Michael Paul?
Hello guys. New here, and I'm just excited to be on the show and talk about some interesting ideas with my buddy Kyle.
Absolutely. Well, with that said, let's go ahead and jump right in. So today, we're going to be talking about emergentism. And what emergentism is the belief in emergence, particularly as it involves consciousness and the philosophy of mind. A property of a system is said to be emergent if it is a new outcome of some other properties of the system and their interaction, while it is itself different from them. It is important to note here that emergent properties cannot be reduced to or are deducible from any of the properties that kind of create that property. So, for example, here, let's say that our forebrain is more activated than our hindbrain. And you could say that that would be like a way to tell if you're angry or something. But you cannot deduce that from any of these just because it's your mental states aren't deducible from the physical properties that kind of create them. Does that make sense, Michael Paul?
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense, Kyle.
Perfect sense. Okay. And then do you have any kind of questions or kind of comments on emergentism so far with the definition I provided?
Um, as of now, I don't really have any questions, other than, you know, the three main parts of your brain acting together to form a mental state is a pretty sound argument. So,
Yeah. So, and you'll see later in the video as well that there's kind of examples in real life where like people have had traumatic brain injuries and then their mental states have been altered, which seems like a pretty compelling argument for physicalism if mental states are physical, or I'm sorry, if mental states are straightly physical, then it would make complete sense that if my midbrain gets injured, for example, that maybe I become more aggressive or something like that. But yeah, then kind of moving on. So on this slide, I felt it was kind of important to make a differentiation between vitalism and emergentism. So what vitalism is pretty much the same thing as emergentism, except vitalists believe that it is required that there is a kind of soul element to it. So it only applies to like organic things, for example. So like for emergentism, it could be just like a bunch of programs working together to create a mental state. But for vitalism, there has to be like some kind of biological element, or else it's not really it won't really make anything. So that's kind of an argument for like AI or against AI. What do you think about that, Michael Paul?
so I tend to agree more with vitalism here. You know, my understanding of it all is that three parts of your brain can work to they as it's been told now, three parts of your brain work independently from each other, and they all come together to make your mental state and the way you are perceiving things. Um, and all three of those working together would push more towards vitalism because there's also a soul aspect that I add into it. Um, because, without that, then you can easily replicate how the human experience is. And so far, we have not been able to do that with AI. So,
Yeah, no, and I definitely agree with the soul aspect of the vitalism too. So I'm not sure how strong emergentism is, simply because it seems like, at least for me in my life, like I kind of have my brain does one thing for me, and then my body does another thing for me, and it's kind of up to my soul to decide whether I want to listen to my brain or my body. And then sometimes my brain can kind of overwhelm myself in a way where it's like, for example, like anxiety or something where you're your brain is kind of presenting things to you in a way that is overwhelming and you can't really function the way you'd like to, or for your body, like your instincts taking over when you weren't necessarily trying to do something like that. If you kind of get where I'm saying with that, where there's kind of three parts in play, I feel, at least in my life, or that's my viewpoint on it, I guess. And I don't know how well an emergentist would be able to explain away that because like how would a machine kind of make its decisions? It would be purely mental or you know what I mean? Because it would be based completely off of a program.
Exactly. And, a lot of people may be able to think that you can deduce, processing in your brain down to programs, just codes, zeros and ones, but there's always that aspect of being human that takes over. Like you said, there's instincts that come to play through the thousands of years that humans have walked the earth. We've had instincts play a part in our survival, from hunting and gathering to creating large structures such as like skyscrapers. It's always been um, an evolving process that we've used our brain to help our physical body uh, be able to survive.
Yeah, 100%. And that's where I feel like vitalism does have the stronger kind of argument over emergentism for sure. But kind of moving on from that, I have a kind of real life example of the emergentist kind of viewpoint. So this is Phineas Gage. Some people might know him. He's kind of a big study in the psychology kind of field. So what happened with him was he suffered a severe brain injury. What was happening was he was on a railroad and he was, I guess, placing railroad spikes or something, and I guess one of the detonations went off early and it sent the spike through his eye, pretty much through the bottom of his face out the top of his skull. And after the incident, I guess it's reported that his personality changed, and they say that that's a result from damage from his frontal lobes, which are responsible for like higher level processing, problem solving, memory, language, directed movement, judgment, and impulse control. So there is kind of empirical evidence to kind of say that like all the pieces of your brain working together kind of do create your mental states. But there's also a part of that where it's like, okay, I don't know how I feel like my life is more than just physical, you know what I mean? Which and we were kind of talking about this yesterday where it's like I can be in a in the terms of emergentism, like if my mental state is this, then I should feel this way, right? So like let me go ahead and draw a picture because I feel like that would probably do the best. So if my brain is, let's say, looking like that, the three dots, then I should be happy, right? But and that should be in response to something in the environment. But if I'm in a completely black room, I can still be happy too, which doesn't seem to fit the bill for emergentists, where it's like, well, if my mental state or if my brain pattern looks like this, then that's what this should look like. Even though there's nothing to kind of make it look this way, I can still look that way too. So that's why I don't necessarily believe that that there's no mental aspect to our kind of existence because like for example with Phineas Gage, your brain can get hurt by something and you can kind of still bounce back from it too. So it's not you like because if that were to be the case where like all three of the parts kind of integrating together create that one mental state, if anything ever happened to that thing, you know, one of those parts, then it shouldn't be the same mental state at all in terms of like if it's like the exact, like it has to be a super exact. If like I'm saying here, if this is like this and this makes me happy, if I have just a small red dot right here, it's no longer the same relationship, so therefore I shouldn't be happy anymore, even though it could be something kind of minuscule. But I don't know what you think about that, Michael Paul. What do you have to say?
Yeah, so I agree with that. In terms of, if you're having these predetermined outcomes from this one state, then you it should be easily replicated throughout almost every human experience. Um, and when it comes to like Phineas Gage and the brain injury, making him a different person almost once he recovered from it, there are aspects that I believe that emergentism does work uh, in that regards, because you can take people with brain injuries and they will act differently, whether it's somebody who took a railroad spike through their frontal part, or somebody just with like traumatic brain injuries from sports, playing sports, they tend to act differently once their brain has been damaged. So that would, in a way, advocate for emergentism because they were normal before the injury. They acted, I guess, as a normal part of society beforehand. And once that happened, they were different.
Yeah. And um with what you're saying with like injuries in the NFL and stuff like that, a kind of research group led by Van Horn investigated the levels of white and gray matter damage due to like Gage's injury. And what white matter is, it's like deep in the brain, and it provides vital connections around the brain and is essential to like normal motor and sensory function. But they said that he lost about 11% of his white matter from this incident, and then about 4% of his gray matter, which is kind of white matter loss is kind of like what happens with people with Alzheimer's. So they could, and this is obviously purely speculation because we don't have like the brain to kind of look at it. But it could be argued that he might have had early onset Alzheimer's due to the injury kind of messing with his white matter balance in his brain. And then he started acting out kind of like people with Alzheimer's do. What do you think of that kind of view? Do you think that's accurate, or I mean, do you think it holds
Yeah,
any water?
so I would also agree with that. Your brain is made up the way it is. It's obviously a very complex thing that not many people understand. Everybody's trying to, figure it out and say they've cracked the code or whatever. And you know, losing that much of your brain, it's almost guaranteed that you're going to come out a different person.
Right, 10%, at least 10% is what he lost.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's a big part, you know? Yeah, and I think it's interesting just because, the way it would have been seen like in the past versus how it would be seen nowadays, like in terms of like treatment responses and stuff like that, really kind of makes a difference on like how he would have healed as well too. So I don't know. I just think that's something interesting to kind of consider where it's like, well, in the past we would have looked at it like this, and because of that we see it like that. But nowadays, like with different kind of, what would I say, breakthroughs in science, I guess, like we don't necessarily see the same things that the people in the past saw as so bad. For example, like what would be a good one? Or yeah, like being gay. Like people said being gay was like a um medical condition back in the day, but now people just accept that it's not a choice, which kind of is like what we're saying with Phineas Gage here, where it's like he didn't necessarily have the opportunity to make the choice to act out. It just happened, and that happened because of his, like something in his brain, which is something that we kind of, well, I guess that's an argument that they make for gay people, is that they don't have a choice. Like it's just what they are. So that's kind of what I would say for Phineas as well, is like he suffered this injury, and then after that, what happened to him was just what it was. Like it couldn't be anything different. And because of that, I wonder how true emergentism is, because with that physicalist viewpoint of like everything is physical, that it kind of erases the mental like at all. So like saying that he acted different just means that his brain was different, which is exactly what happened. But it seems like that's just not true, at least in our physical lives that we live. That like, I feel like there's more to life than just my brain doing whatever. But I don't know. It's really interesting to me to kind of discuss, because it's hard to kind of choose a side because there's kind of evidence for both.
Exactly. And that's where I feel like this is a very interesting topic because it toes the line between emergentism and vitalism. Your physical state and what you're physically in and seeing can definitely play with your mental state. But at the same time, your brain does act alone, almost like they've compared your brain to a supercomputer in a way.
Yeah.
It does act alone and can change your mental state totally independently, based on where you are in life. You can be like take for example, like a Hindu monk. He's in the mountains, meditating or living a certain lifestyle, and he's one of the happiest people in the world. Um, he's doing exactly what he loves, and you can put somebody else in that situation, and they're not going to take it the same way. So the brain, in that regards, which is very simple, can act independently of your mental state, or not mental state, physical state.
Yeah. No, and I actually think that's a really good example, Michael Paul, because like you're saying, like I could win the lottery and be on the top of the world, but someone else could have that same thing happen to them and they could hate it. And if what they're saying with physicalism is true, or even emergentism for that fact, it should be the same no matter what. Like no matter who's doing it, it should be the same. Like it should be like the scientific method. Like if I have something like this and it's in my brain, if it's in your brain, it should act out the exact same way. Which is like I've been saying, it doesn't seem like that's really the case, which is interesting because how does it work otherwise, you know?
Exactly.
But we can kind of move on from Phineas Gage here. I feel like we kind of hit the nail on the head there. But here are some arguments against emergentism. So the first argument against is the philosophical zombie argument. So how this argument works is it's pretty much a thought experiment, and what they say is if you take something and like imagine a world where you have everything that you experience right now, but you have no consciousness of it. And one, this is a really big argument against physicalism in general, just because if you're able to imagine a world where everything is the exact same, but you're not conscious, then that means that consciousness is not physical, which means that I pretty much just says physicalism is not true in anyway. So, what do you think of that? Do you think that they call them P zombies or philosophical zombies? Do you feel like that kind of holds water, where if I can imagine it, then it's probably possible?
So, what I would have to say to this is if you're a physical body acting out and expressing emotions without being conscious of it, and having all of these different thoughts, mental states, being able to function normally in your life, um, to me, that still isn't living. Like that would be the definition, not the definition, but that would to me be a zombie. I
Yeah,
wouldn't necessarily agree with being able to uh, live out your life without having some conscious ability to make decisions for yourself. Um, that would, to me, not work. Uh, there are plenty of people who do go through life and they just kind of roll by and, take whatever happens, and they don't really give thought into everything. And I mean, I guess that would, in a sense, be a zombie. Like they just work their 9 to 5 job, go home, live their life, and do it until they die. They don't go to try and experience new things or whatever, and it kind of just works out for them in a
yeah,
sense.
and I can definitely, I definitely see what you're saying with like people going through the life as zombies, but I feel like even at a certain level, like you're kind of making the choice to do that. Like it might be like a habit of you to do that, but it's still a choice. In the terms of like a zombie or a philosophical zombie, they don't have the ability to make any choices. Like everything just it's all based off like firings in their brain. So like
Oh,
and we were
okay.
kind of
So,
talking about this last night too, where it's like I might have a neuron in my brain that's dedicated to emergentism, and it just keeps banging and banging and banging, and that's why I keep talking on it. And once it stops, I might I don't under. And this is where my problem with emergentism kind of is. It's like once if what I'm saying is true, that like emergentism and my mental state and my ability to speak on it is just based on a neuron in my brain, then why does that neuron get activated when it shouldn't be activated? Like if I'm working out, why would I think about emergentism? You know what I mean? Like without any kind of stimulus to create that, why is there no why does that effect happen, I guess, if that makes sense.
No, that makes total sense. I kind of had the understanding a little bit wrong beforehand. Um, yeah, so when you deduce it down to neurons firing off in your brain and that creating your decisions for you without you having your own willpower to do so, um, I can agree to an extent because when you're just living your daily life, you can make the decision to go and almost do whatever you want. Like I'm sitting in my room right now. I could make the decision to go out and go get food, or I could not. And, that's based on my brain telling my body what to do. My brain telling me, hey, it's firing off these neuron synapses, and you're from those uh, functions in your brain, you're going to go make that decision.
Yeah. And that's what my issue is, and I guess I'm kind of beating the dead horse now. But like, with that said, if that's what's making my decisions, why can I think of like a pink elephant right now? Like, why does emergentism and like a green horse? You know what I mean? Why would I think of those things in relation to like my, if that's what's going on, where it's like one neuron is just making me say all these things, why would that neuron make me say like green elephant, pink horse, whatever? You know what I mean? It should only if my brain's like this, and the only reason why I'm saying this is because my brain's in a certain path. Why would I have any other thing to say other than what that path has to offer? Which I guess if you look at it from a standpoint of like that, you can technically, like, your neurons, once you kind of make a new connection, it can go any direction, up, down, left, right, side to side. So I guess it is possible to say that there's what I say, innumerable possibilities from one single thing. But at the same time, it seems more like it's more of a mental choice than, oh, because if that's the case where it's like my brain goes from emergentism to pink elephant to green horse, it makes sense that that's what should be the natural flow every single time, and that's not what happens to be the case.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree there.
Hmm. Yeah, I feel like we hit P zombies pretty well. Moving on to, so this is a figurine made by Haewon Kim, and he raised an objection of emergentism based on causal closure. So what he says to say is emergentism strives to be compatible with physicalism, and physicalism has a principle of causal closure where every physical event is fully accountable in terms of physical causes. So P1 is equal to P2, and P1 actualizes M1, and P2 actualizes M2. So what they're saying here is if P1 creates P2, and M1 is supposed to create M2, it's not possible for M1 to create M2 because through emergentism, the only reason why I get to here is because the only reason why I have M1 is because P1 is the way it is. So I can't say that M2 creates P2 because there's no real kind of way to account for that in physicalism if mental states don't exist. So um, when I go to P2, then I deal with mental state two. And this is kind of the argument I was giving for the last one. Why would I, if my mental state goes from emergentism to green elephant, is that because of my mental flow, or is that because my brain is in the pattern of emergentism to, okay, so emergentism leads to green elephant? And if that's the case, it should do that every single time, which it doesn't, which is, I feel, a great argument against emergentism because it says, well, your mental state doesn't necessarily create the next one. It's your physical states that create your mental states. But does that make sense, or like did I explain that very well?
Yeah, so in a basic term, somebody who's not in depth as you are, your physical state one can only create mental state one, and mental state two can only be created by physical state two. M2 cannot create P2 because M2 is dependent on P2.
Yes. Yep. And that's where and I guess the word they use is overdetermined because there's no way to say that M1 creates M2 if mental states for one aren't real. So, oh, shoot, excuse me. But yeah, it's just an interesting way to think about it because you would think like, for example, if you're reading, no, not even reading, if you're just in a dark room and you're writing a story, for example, like why would you write A B C, like if you're writing, why does it go A B C D instead of like why do you go from, or people who make up new words, for example, like why does their physical state here create this physical state that leads from T to H, for the word the, why does that happen? Why does it have to be that way where it's like, because it could easily go from T to T, in terms of like, because typically your mental states don't differ too much when you're in a state of flow, for example. Like you're kind of in that state for a little bit. Um, so like saying that like if my mental state is, or my physical state is one and it gets to two and two is supposed to be very similar to one, why does it go like, how does my mental states kind of flow from that? Because it doesn't really seem to make any sense if you think of it that way. I don't
Yeah.
know if I explained that very well at all, to be honest.
Um, so my understanding of his whole diagram here is that you need to have physical states in order to have mental states. And um, correct me if I'm wrong, he also says that mental states aren't a real thing, that it's just your physical state that, um, like, such as your brain firing off to allow you to have your own, I guess, uh, viewpoint, not viewpoint, but, well, I don't want to keep saying mental state, but I guess mental state.
No, that's perfectly fine. I think you're correct there too.
And while you can have um, your physical view and what's placed in front of you, um, your mental state is still working it's still working independently. Um, because like we hit on earlier, you can have multiple different situations you're in that create different mental outcomes. And if you were just in a dark room and had that as your physical, like you were just in a dark room, your mental state should always be the same. There, you should always feel the same way if you're in this dark room.
Yeah, with
Um,
no stimulus at all.
yeah, with no stimulus at all. Like some people might feel fear. Some people might be okay, calm, and collected. It's dependent on that certain person themselves.
Yeah. And when you were speaking about that, it kind of reminded me of this thing called multiple realizability. So how that kind of is explained is like, um, and this kind of goes back to the vitalism emergentism argument. Uh, so our mental states could be multiply realizable. So, for example, like if you get stabbed, that's gonna hurt. But that same stabbing feeling could feel good if you have like an abscess that needs to be popped. So like that same feeling, like because you're gonna feel the stabbing sensation no matter what. It could be seen as good or bad, and it doesn't necessarily have to be based on like whatever mental state you're in or whatever physical state your brain's in, because your physical state is going to be the same when you're getting stabbed regardless. Uh, but that mental state could be but that physical state could be mostly realizable depending on like your mental state. So like if you've been in pain from an abscess and someone stabs you and it feels better, that's great. But if you have no kind of pain there and you get stabbed, which is the same exact physical state, you're not going to feel the same happiness or relief, I suppose. You'll feel more pain and anger, I guess. At least I would. But I think that kind of applies here too, where it's like my physical state here could be seen as good or bad. And we were kind of talking about that earlier too, where it's like I might see this as good and you might see it as bad, but that doesn't, it has to be the same thing every time, or else that's not really a good argument at all if it's different
Yes.
for everybody. But
Yes.
but yeah. So that's pretty much all I got for today. Let me go ahead and stop the screen share. Cool. That's the first time I've got that to work like that the entire time I've been doing these videos. So, but yeah, do you have anything you'd like to kind of add to the end here, Michael Paul, or is there anything you really liked from the video that you thought was important and worth kind of re-mentioning?
Um, there's nothing I can really add to it, other than just like, I'm glad I get to share just a normal person's viewpoint on this whole thing and get to talk to you about this. Um, because before even uh before talking to you about it, I really didn't have an understanding of what this was. I didn't even know emergentism was a thing. And you helped me you helped talk me through it and be able to formulate my own understanding of it. And unfortunately, emergentism isn't necessarily something that I can wholeheartedly agree with, because in the aspect of life, you're always going to have the human element to it that allows you to experience things differently. And in regards to emergentism, everything should be able to be deduced down to certain neurons firing at certain times, allowing your brain to make decisions for itself and have these different mental states.
And I'd have to definitely agree with you on that. And I honestly, I don't full heartedly agree with emergentism, but I don't think it's completely off either. I think it's kind of more of a gray area where it's like certain parts of certain theories kind of work together, kind of like how people say for like religions, like every religion's a little wrong or the same amount of wrong off, but they all have like little snippets of truth in them. And I feel like emergentism, at least the view where it's like all of our kind of all the properties or all the little pieces of our brain kind of come together and create our mental state. I think that that isn't completely wrong. And it's interesting to me because if that's true, how much of that plays a part into our mental state, where it's like how much of it is really based off like what our brain's feeling, and then how much of it's based off what we actually think. Because if emergentism's right and physicalism's true, then we don't really have any thoughts anyway. It's all just physical regardless. So um it's just interesting. And I'm really glad that you were able to kind of, because I know I was using a lot of jargony terms, but you were able to kind of, what would I say, like break those down into more simple ways to put them that I just was not able to kind of do at the time. But I'm really glad you were able to, because you kind of put in really great terms, man. And I'm just really glad that you were able to kind of get on the video today. But with that said, for everyone at home, if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. This year, I'm gonna be trying to get a lot more out as much as I can. So we're gonna try and have a great year. And yeah, everyone have a great day and have a great night tonight. Okay. Peace out.